Hey guys, it's me, Seren, back with another video. Today is the very last day of Hidden Figures, and today's hidden figure is Marsha P. Johnson. Now, Marsha P. Johnson has kind of some growing recognition, but I wanted to do today's video on Marsha P. Johnson because she's definitely a hugely hidden figure in the sense that so much of this growing and pretty much mainstream at this point LGBT, what people say, quilt bag, which I like, quilt bag, or LGBTQIA plus, or queer, or whatever you want to call it. So much of this kind of mainstream queer movement, and especially last year, 2016, was a huge year for trans rights, even though now they're kind of trying to roll a lot of that stuff back under President Cheeto. A lot of pretty much everything, in terms of like the mainstream awareness of queer rights and especially trans rights was brought to you by Marsha P. Johnson, who was a Black transgender woman, and also Sylvia Rivera, who was a Latinx transgender woman. And yet, white cis gays, and especially white cis gay men, have become the face of the queer movement. And there was like this huge fuss and this like huge hubbub when that movie Stonewall came out. If it wasn't last year, it was the year before, which was about literally the Stonewall riots, and which centered this completely fictional, made up white cis man as the main character. And people were like, what the hell? The Stonewall riots were started by transgender women of color, and especially Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. So how are you gonna make up this like white gay cis man and center him? And again, this goes into these different ways that like that race impacts everything we do. Like race impacts everything we do. Like we cannot have these Black and brown bodies at the forefront of this movement, even if we have to literally invent white characters and white protagonists, and especially white males to center, because that's the only way that our movement is gonna like gain any type of legitimacy. And just like I said in my fucking Milo video, white gay men are notoriously fucking racist and anti-Black as fuck. But like Black and brown bodies are really they are the people that like started your movement and started your resistance. So I just like had to make this video about Marsha P. Johnson, and I really wanted this to be my last Hidden Figures for this month. To kind of go out with a bang. We're gonna figure out how we're gonna move forward implementing it. We'll talk about it. So, Marsha P. Johnson. Marsha P. Johnson was a trans woman who became an important face to the gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender community in New York City. She was recognized by being herself and fearing no judgment of the harassment and ridicule of dressing and living as a woman. The hardships of a transgender individual were nothing new to Marsha, who herself was living on the streets of New York without a permanent home, finances, or living arrangements. This tended to be a normal struggle for transgender individuals. Marsha P. Johnson felt that these people who wanted nothing more than to be themselves deserve support from the growing LGBT community in New York. Because even from then, gay people were like, no, like cis gay people were like, we're still not cool with having you kind of in our community. And I'm going to go ahead and say, similar to how they like to push out bisexuals, a lot of fucking cis gay people are like, again, getting back into those ideas about like, you don't really want to like dismantle oppressive systems. You just want to get a little bit of power for yourself to fucking wield over others. So no, you're like a 5-star lesbian, or, you're like a 5-star, fucking gay man. You're cis, you're up at the top of the food chain, and like bisexuals are a little bit lower, and asexuals are a little bit lower, and transgender people are a little bit lower. But as long as you got your little bit of power up at the top, that's all you fucking care about, right? Moving on. Marsha P. Johnson felt these people who wanted nothing more than to be themselves deserve support from the growing LGBT community in New York, and along with fellow transgender activist Sylvia Rivera, she founded the Street Transvestite, now known as Transgender, Action Revolutionaries, or STAR, to help others out there facing the struggles of an unaccepting society. Born let's see. Born August 24th, 1945, as Malcolm Michaels, Marsha legally changed her name after 1966 when she moved from New Jersey to Greenwich Village permanently. She changed her name to Marsha P. Johnson. When people would ask her what her middle name was, she replied, "Pay it no mind." And there's actually been a documentary done about Marsha Johnson called "Pay It No Mind." It is on YouTube, and I will have links in the description box. Of course, there will be links in the description box. This response was intended to be a rhetorical answer to the question many had on their minds as to whether she was male or female. By putting "Pay It No Mind" in her name, it deterred the public from asking the question that she hated to receive. Marsha was an eccentric woman who was known for her exotic hats and jewelry, which stood out to the public and attracted attention to her. When she was wearing these items or any female clothing, she was Marsha P. Johnson, but there were times where she had to go back to her male persona of Malcolm. And I also want to talk about a little bit of the history kind of pre the Stonewall riots in New York City and in Greenwich Village. It was like very known that there were like certain bars like the Stonewall where like the gays and the transvestites, this is like the terminology that was used at the time, would go. However, a lot of the times if you were dressed as a man, let's just say for like a trans woman, if you were like dressed as a man, or if you were presenting as a man, or even for like, let's say a lesbian, if you were like dressed as a woman, you're presenting as a straight woman, the cops wouldn't fuck with you. But if you had even if it was just one article of clothing on you, be it a hat, a pair of earrings, that kind of like marked you as like, oh, like queer or gender nonconforming or anything like that, they could come and they could arrest you. So for a lot of these people, they had to present in a certain way in order to not be literally arrested, right? Let me keep going. She was more comfortable and happy in her female persona as Marsha. She lived in New York City's Greenwich Village from 1966 until her death in 1992, and Marsha was devoted to the lifestyle that she lived and to the support of others who wanted to live their lives that way. Acceptance was not easy to come by. Living in New York City, and the rejection of this culture turned violent in 1969 during the Stonewall riots in Greenwich Village of New York City, which was known for the LGBT subculture. Gay bars and clubs also had their place in Greenwich Village, and due to the growing number of LGBT individuals, it meant acceptance and salvation, right? So these were some of the few places that you could go, that you could actually be yourself. There were now places to meet others who were experiencing the same bigotry and become friends with more people rather than foes. On the night of June 28, 1969, police in Greenwich Village raided a known gay bar, the Stonewall Inn, which Marsha P. Johnson had been at, and a violent riot followed. Robert Hyde remembers the role Marsha played the night of the riot, saying, "I just saw her in the middle of the whole thing, screaming and yelling and throwing rocks and almost like Molly Pitcher in the Revolution or something." Hyde and several others interviewed for David Carter's book, Stonewall, claimed that Marsha was the person who really started it on the first night of the riots. And the Stonewall riots are recognized in LGBT history as like a watershed moment. Like this was a turning point in terms of the rights of queer people really getting pushed to the mainstream. And again, several eyewitnesses say that like Marsha P. Johnson was like the first person to like pick up a rock and like throw it, and that her close friend Sylvia Rivera was like right there with her. Like that these transgender women of color were the ones that fucking started it. Just like we start everything, like women of color and especially black women do everything. Like we do everything. I don't care. I don't want to hear it. We do everything, period, the end. Sylvia Rivera recalls about the night of the Stonewall riots. This was started by the street queens of that era, which I was a part of, Marsha P. Johnson, and many others that are not here anymore. The Stonewall riots became the spark that ignited queer rights and activism through the efforts of Marsha P. Johnson and other fellow activists and supporters. Along with fellow transgender activists and friend Sylvia Rivera, they founded the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionary Star, and they were able to organize with homeless and or runaway queer and transgender individuals to build a community and live together. According to Rivera, Star was for the street gay people, the street homeless people, and anybody that needed help at that time. Keeping other transgenders off the streets was the primary goal of Star, and the responsibilities of the children or youth of the house were to find food, a relatively relatively safe responsibility compared to prostitution that Marsha had experienced in her youth to pay rent, where violence occurred regularly and lives were always at risk. It is well known that many queer and transgender individuals have to turn to especially sex work because that is the only way for them to be able to support themselves. And so many of them are homeless or living on the streets. They've been kicked out. They've been put out of their homes by their parents. So the whole point of STAR was to like provide a space for these people, right? In the 60s, we're talking about in the 60s. We're not now in the 2000s when, you know, a lot of this stuff has like reached the forefront, but like transgender women of color are still being murdered at excruciatingly high rates. A transgender woman was just murdered in New Orleans. What's her name? Transgender woman in New Orleans. China Doll Dupree, say her fucking name, just stabbed to death one day ago in New Orleans, right? Like, it is still so dangerous to even be on the streets as a transgender woman, but so many transgender women have to be on the streets because they have to turn to sex work to survive, or they're kicked out by, you know, like all these things. So STAR as a place for people to go was groundbreaking. It was revolutionary. Marsha referred to anyone brought off the streets into the STAR homes as children, and she was referred to as the Queen Mother. Another activist group that Marsha became a part of after the Stonewall riots was the Gay Liberation Front, or the GLF. The GLF sought political action and protection for citizens based on their sexual orientation or behavior against oppressive laws and unequal ethics. A 1970s newspaper titled Come Out stated, "Gay Liberation Front welcomes any gay person, regardless of sex, race, age, or social behavior. Though some other gay organizations may be embarrassed by drags or transvestites," again, we're getting into that hierarchy within the queer community, GLF believes that we should accept all of our brothers and sisters unconditionally. GLF also gave acceptance to individuals like Marsha and Sylvia who did not identify as gay but rather as transgender. Marsha P. Johnson passed away on July 6, 1992. Her body was found in the Hudson River in New York, and police and investigators ruled her death as a suicide. People who knew her and were close to her insisted that she was not suicidal, and some people wanted a full investigation of her death as a murder. There has been no criminal investigation into the death of Marsha P. Johnson, but a lot of people do feel like she was probably killed by someone and dumped in the river, which is horrible. Today, Marsha's legacy lives on within the LGBTQ community and beyond. One of the city's best-known drag queens and street queens, Johnson has been identified as one of the first to fight back in the clashes with the police amid the Stonewall riots. Let's go ahead and get into a quote. "I wanted to see gays at least have a start in life because they never had anything called a parade that was their own. They always had to hide in the closet of somebody else's parade. Darling, I want my gay rights now." Marsha P. Johnson, a hidden figure, last day of Hidden Figures. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Tons of links in the description box. See you guys next time. Peace.